Okay, so it's wonderful to be back. I apologize for the delay since last time. Be'ez Hashem, this coming Thursday, we're off to the States and actually really to Canada, where my brother-in-law, my wife's brother, is getting married. Be'ez Hashem in 2 weeks. And so I wanted very much that we should have at least tonight, because we won't have next week, to finish the parak. You know, it's been sort of hanging there, that last segment. So with Hashem's help, we're going to finish the first chapter tonight. If you would like to go back and review, if you can either find the documents on the chat, you're welcome to reach out as well. You know, so just to look it over the Hebrew if you can, or the shiurim. You listen on 2 times speed, which is generally how I listen to things today. And I actually had something. I don't really have time, whatever, if it's sitting and listening to lectures or anything like that in person. Usually, I'm listening to things on 2 times speed. But today we had a certain staff thing where we had to sit in on meetings. And it was wild. Like, I wish I could have just recorded him and just played it back, like later, in triple speed. Not that he was speaking slow or anything, but I've just become so conditioned. So that's an interesting thing. I don't know if it's a good thing or a bad thing. I don't know, but it's a thing. Anyway, so I do try to speak a little bit more quickly, but I speak even quicklier, if that's a word, if you speed me up. Okay, so tonight's shir Be'ez Hashem is dedicated to Sabaldina Bas Avraham, whose yahrzeit is tonight. The Neshama should have an aliyah Be'ez Hashem in the schus of all of our learning, and all the wonderful things that her beloved daughter does for the whole world and the community specifically. Okay, let's jump in with Hashem's help to Yichud HaHisbodedus. If you take a look on the bottom of the first column, we have the Os Dalid here, and here he's going to finish off the chapter with a slightly different element than we've been speaking about beforehand. And keep in mind, this is all just by way of introduction. He's just sort of opening up the topic. And we're going to get into all these details much more specifically as the Sefer unfolds. And then if you turn over the page, hopefully we'll get here. I think we will. That's not good. 1 second. Sorry. Be'ezras Hashem, toward the end of the shir, we're going to learn a teaching which is not going to be the regular mahalach with these shiurim. Usually we're just going to learn from the Sefer, but I brought a piece from the Piacezner Rebbe that I found to be particularly moving and relevant to our subject. Okay, so let's begin with Os Dalid, and the tzaddik says like this: Amnam. He says, after everything that we've spoken about, building up the dynamic of the relationship between a Jew and Hashem that is specific to Hisbodedus, that's specific to this experience, having intimate moments with the Master of Heaven and Earth in that sense where he's our friend, so to speak, where we can speak to him about everything that's happening in our lives. We spoke very much at length about the dynamic of the atmosphere where we walk in and we're seen, right? And we're respected. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is sort of happy that we came, because really he's happy when a person recognizes him, which is the whole purpose for heaven and earth, having been created in the first place. And so when a person keeps that in mind, you just walk in and immediately there's this revelation, there's this understanding. Okay, I'm good. And from that place, a person can begin to think things through, talk things over in a much more stable, balanced, and healthy way. And just to clarify, somebody made a comment to me the other day that threw me off a bit. Just to clarify, this is not to do away with all the other aspects of the relationship that we have with Hashem, in which he's also our king, and that there are standards that we should live by. This doesn't mean to suggest that all of a sudden just, we're chami in such a way where everything else goes out the window, chas v'shalom, and that there's nothing to strive for, and there's nothing to accomplish, and there's nothing to do, and everybody's okay as they are. That's a chas v'shalom, not my intention, and not Rav Kluger's intention, and not Rabbi Nachman's intention, or anybody else. That's not the message here. The message is that there are pockets of time in life, there are islands within all the different facets of our avodas Hashem that must maintain and contain all the other elements in order to be healthy, much like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. You have all these different elements or different layers that contribute to a healthy life, or much more, I would say specifically a diet. It's like you need a bit of ragalach and some cherries, obviously. Bartanura, maybe also. But when you bring it all together, that's a healthy thing. That's for those on the Zoom, there's a table with ragalach and cherries and bartanura. So anyway, so a person gets all these different elements together. What Hisbodedus is, and that's why all these shiurim have been focused on that element of it. This is the time when we can channel that facet of the relationship. So of course we've been speaking a lot about Hashem's love, and so that's the topic of Hisbodedus. But that's not to suggest that that there isn't so many other aspects which all sort of fold into and are really part and parcel of this element of the relationship happening as well. So we spoke, if you just look right back to the previous paragraph, so we ended off with this last week, or 2 weeks, whatever we learned last, where the tzaddik writes in the beginning of that paragraph, so great is this silent, delicate sweetness, that at every other moment in a Jew's life, when we think back to those moments, which are, like we say, infinite moments, unencumbered. You're not rushed. You took time off. You're separated from the distractions of this world. And even if there are many important things that we'll have to tend to, now they're irrelevant, because in this moment, or these 5 minutes, or 10 minutes, or 20 minutes, and so on and so forth, a person is just beyond, right? Meaning to say a person is not, it's not relevant. It's not relevant. Thank you so much for coming. It's not relevant for the person to think about all the other aspects of life, because there are no other aspects of life. Right? Meaning, in that moment, all there is the essence of the essence of the essence for which we are created, which is to remain conscious in this world of concealment that everything's a miracle and that the divine is constantly present and accessible. Right? And that's the point. Now, there's much else to be accomplished, and as Hashem, our roles as mothers and as children, and as parents. And if a person has an occupation and as a friend and so on and so forth, there are so many different elements of life. There are so many different things happening in the world that relate to political events, that relate to philosophies of different ways to live in different societies and different cultures and so on and so forth and so on and so forth. All of that is true, but all of it is decidedly secondary to this moment, or 5 moments. We say a moment, but I mean 5 moments. Whether it's 20 minutes, half hour, Rabbi Nachman always speaks about an hour, where everything fades away. That's why I think he calls it a silent sweetness. These moments of personal prayer, where the whole world is temporarily, because this is not the ideal. Right, we're not supposed to be monks, sort of meditating on a mountain the whole day. That's not the ideal of Judaism. Judaism, again, as I've mentioned in previous classes recently, emerges from Yaakov Avinu, who is the synthesis between his grandfather Abraham, who's the midah, the trait of chesed, kindness, and Yitzchak, right, his father, who's the trait of severity and gevura. Yaakov Avinu is the synthesis. So Judaism is always this and that. Right? That's the energy of Judaism. We don't say, pure transcendent spirituality and forget the world, but we don't either say, pure materialistic, physicality and forget the spiritual. We say we can integrate these both, and we can live with a symbiosis, a symbiotic relationship that they maintain, where there's no distinction between the two, right? There's a holistic whole that includes both body and soul, and that's called Yaakov Avinu. That's called the Torah, etc. And so we leave the world temporarily, right? Just temporarily, but when a person is in these moments, we can close everything else away. And there's what he calls again mesikus charishus, a silent sweetness. And he says, Shebachol eish Yehudi niskar ba, at any other moment in the Jew's day, whatever you're else involved in, when you turn back on your phone, and when you leave the park or nature or the forest or wherever else you were, and you're going back to the office, you're going back to interpersonal dynamics, and you're going back to parenting or mothering or being a friend or being having a boss or whatever else you're doing in your life, all of which is important, all of which are opportunities to connect to the divine in different ways, right? By being a human, with all of what that entails. That's all part of the fixing, every aspect of it, because it's all an opportunity to be bigger. That's really what it is. To be more godly, to be more elevated, to be more compassionate, more sensitive, more gentle and wise. Like that, or we would say enlightened. Let's say, to use the Eastern conception, right? To be bigger, more realized. So throughout the rest of that day, you always have the opportunity to just think back to those moments of stillness, that island, and he says, misnachim bazeh. Whenever we think back to those moments, misnachim bazeh, it brings us consolation. She'enoi levad ba'olamai. I'm not alone. I'm not alone in this world. I have an undercurrent to my life that underlies everything else, that sits at the absolute essence of my existence and my identity. And it bubbles up to the source to manifest in all the different facets of the human experience. But I know that I'm accompanied by the infinite presence within everything and beyond everything all the time, who created me so that I can build a personal relationship with him. And the whole human experience is an exercise in that. Like Rabbi Levi Yitzchak of Berditchev, famously the great Hasidic master, taught, he said to Hashem, he said, Master of the world, you and I are playing a game of hide and seek. And I find you everywhere. Everywhere I find you. Right? Because God is hidden not by everything, but in everything, in every experience, in every moment, Okay, so that was what he was speaking about in terms of the Hisbodedus of last week, or last session. Now take a look at number 4, Oisdalid. At the bottom of the page, the first column, and he says like this. Here he's going to describe a slightly different dynamic. And again, this is just broad strokes. We're going to get into all of these details as the Sefer unfolds. Amnam, he says, however, we can't forget, Yesh Matzavim, there are some circumstances, Shahan Nefesh Ko'eves Umara, when a Jew's really in pain. A Jew's really in pain. Which Jew isn't really in pain in today's world? Right? Not just because of what's happening in Israel, I say just, I don't mean just. But what's happening in the whole world. The fragmentation and the lack of consciousness and the pain that emerges thereof. How could a Jew not feel completely bewildered? Ko'eves umara, in a state of embitterment. And he says, in this state, there's no time, so to speak, to work through in our minds, in our hearts, all the different aspects of like putting together the details that together create the dynamic that we spoke about in previous sessions. To sort of remember, okay, good. I'm walking into a space where, like we described, I'm in God's spotlight, right? And he's happy that I came, and he's whispering into my ear, Tov she'igata, or Tov shabata, like we said, it's really good. I'm happy that you came. Thanks for coming. Spending time with me. It means the world to me, right? And all this. He says, no, there's no time for that. A Jew runs to the field, or a Jew runs to her room, or a Jew runs to somewhere where you can be alone with the divine. And just begins to pour forth their pain and their sadness, just like tears, which don't emerge slowly but surely. They just, a person, you ever heard this terminology? Of course, burst out crying, right? Tears it doesn't like sort of develop. A person just bursts out crying. Why? Because what tears are, the Piacezner Rebbe describes, just like a person who takes water and pours and pours and pours into a cup until it overflows. The Piacezner Rebbe says tears is the human soul overflowing. So that means that the process happens inside. The build up. And then when it hits that point, it's just another terminology from our sages, poretz bebechi. Poretz means to break all boundaries. It explodes, right? Bursts out in tears. And the Jew cries out her situation with sadness, or with an outpouring of the heart. And there's no time for niceties, you understand? There's no time for pleasantries. It's just the thing itself. And a person just jumps in to such a high degree of intensity. And he says, he says, this is very understandable. Where is a human being to turn in a time of confusion and sadness, if not to the Creator of heaven and earth? Where else does a person turn? And we see this time and time and time again in people who are the most staunch, atheists, or have all these interesting philosophical ideas. But when it really comes down to it, there's an expression in English, no atheist in a foxhole. I'm sure there are some really staunch atheists in a foxhole, but it's a generalization. But generally speaking, especially Yidden, especially Jews, you see what's going on in Eretz Yisrael. And people feel that they're in a state of terrible danger. The whole entire nation is saying Tehillim. Everyone, it doesn't matter. It's not a thing now of ideological differences. Now it's for real. You understand? Now it's for real. A person turns to the Creator, because al tiftuchu b'nedivim bevan adam she'en lo teshua. People there's no one, right? There's no one out there. There's just one, right, in everything. Where does the Jew turn? Except our Father in heaven. The Rami says, however, we still have to understand that in a deeper way, it's deeper than this. Not to say that all those other aspects and dynamics or facets that make up that dynamic don't exist. It's rather more accurately stated that kol sidrei hadavarim nif'alim kfar me'aleihem. They happen automatically. Meaning in such a situation where a person's on the verge of tears, so at that point, it's almost unnecessary for the person to now start thinking through all this, to get themselves into the frame of mind, because it just happens. When a person is in tears and a person runs into the embrace of someone that they love, someone that loves them, a person that's connected in such a deep way, it's obvious. I mean, the closeness is it's automatic. There's no build-up necessary. The person's already there. You've arrived. Because the person's soul is just overflowing before the person's rock and Creator. Derech Mashal, for example, you have a little child who something happens to him. Let's say, because I think it's true that even more painful than any kind of physical, person gets a scrape, he falls off a bike or something. Let's say he's being taunted by other children. Should never happen, but it happens. It happens. And the kid is really broken. Happens. And runs into the house, runs to his father, with crying and with screaming al masha erloi about what happened to him. He said that there's no concept of the father sort of encouraging the child to present things in an orderly way. It's not the time for that. We'll get the story later. Now it's time for a hug. It's not relevant. You see a kid who's overwhelmed with pain, who can't even speak because they're so, to their core, they're shaken. So now he says, he says, what you need to do now is listen, and if it's a state of danger, and just do what needs to be done. I think I'll ask questions later, you'll figure it out. Right? But it's the same thing. It's like chas v'shalom should never be, but if there's a dangerous situation, there's a fire, people act with knee-jerk, and it's not time to now make philosophical speculations about why it's important to do this or that, or here are our values and so on and so forth. It's life or death. You jump. There's a fire in the house, you run. It's not a... So he says it's only after this sort of subsides, after the Jew in the nimshal, in the actual circumstance here, sort of takes the burden off of their heart. After they unload, and the unloading could look really unpleasant. The unloading could be anger. The unloading could be fear. It could be, let's say, more constricted aspects of consciousness that we bring to Hashem, which is totally normal. We're made humans. Where people make the misconception that if a person is really a ma'amin, a person really has emunah, so they feel no emotion anymore. Because they have so much emunah that everything's good all the time. Like, that's not it. That's not it. Maybe angels are like that, But to be a human is to be Avram Avinu, who looks at what's going on to Sodom, and he fights with Hashem over it. He grapples with him. Right? David HaMelech starts many of the kapitelach, many of the prakim in Tehillim. We mentioned with the word lam natseach. Lam natseach, right? It means really to the conductor, let's say. But if you look in the Gemara Psachim, our sages actually teach that the word lamnatseach is a conjugation of a few words. Zamru, because it says lamnatseach mizmar shir, right? To the conductor, mizmar shir, a song, a poetic song, let's say. So the Gemara says no. Lamnatseach means zamru, we should sing, lemi, to the being, sheminatzchin oisai, who we conquer, we are victorious over, v'sameach, and he enjoys that. It's a reference to Hashem. Zamru, we sing, lemi sheminatzchin oisai, v'sameach. Hashem wants us to challenge, not to be so passive all the time. To cry out with the pain of the Shekhinah that's inside of us, to cry out over every injustice, to cry out over every confusion, to cry out over the brokenness of the world that we channel into our hearts and souls as Rachmanim Baishanim Goim Lichasadim, as a nation of people who are sensitive and who are gentle and who are compassionate. And so it might not look so pretty, the way that he's saying it. Parak ma'asai milibai. A person sometimes just feels the need to just let loose, and that's okay. That's okay. That's okay. To whom should we let loose our authentic human feelings, if not to our Creator, who created us to be human? Now, once that's finished, so then nibnes kamasa kasidra umsiyashavas daita. Then we sort of get back into a more expansive state of mind, and then all the fundamental concepts kick back in. Emuna, Hashem's got this. He's running the show. Everything that we see is only on the surface, etc., etc. But again, the way in which the true master plan is going to unfold is not by us sort of stepping back and letting the worst travesties take place in the world without making any effort, not through prayer or practical shtadlus, to get involved because it's all good. No. It is all good, but the goodness needs to unfold through humans that experience the ra, experience the unhealth and the disjointedness and the lack of ideal circumstance in the current world order, and do everything that we can in our tiny little human ways to bring more light to the world. And that's the way that God's master plan works. But it isn't, so to speak, where we just sit back and we assume that everything's okay. We make no effort to make the world any better, and Hashem's got this. No, Hashem's got it because He gave it to you. And hopefully we're doing what we need to do. So if we don't feel pain, and if we don't feel bothered, and we don't feel that something's off and that someone's got to do something about it, and if no one else, it's going to be me, which should be true for each of us in our lives, because each of us are in our own, sort of circumstance, where in a certain sense there's something that we're there to bring to that circumstance that no one else can, which is why we're in that situation, right? And we're there to bring a certain light that only we can uniquely bring. So if we don't feel, and if we're not sensitive to the need, then there's going to be a massive void that we were meant to fill. Does that mean that now everything is really out of control, and it's just a bunch of human beings trying to run around and get our head together? No, of course, there's an overarching master plan. But part of that master plan is to lose sight of the master plan and get really, really, riled up about the things that we need to change and take a stand. Then, after unloading like the craziness that we see unfolding in our world in every single aspect, and each person is going to be moved in a different way. There's plenty of pain to go around for every person to have a cause and to feel that all is not right? And every person, different Sharshin Neshama, different people feel, the pain of different aspects of what's going on. Different people feel it with regard to local communities. Different people feel it with regard to the nation. Different people feel it regarding all of humanity. Every person is rooted in a different place, right? And it's all good because there's so much work to do. Once a person comes before HaKadosh Baruch Hu in the most honest and authentic, real way with whatever we're feeling, and we let loose, and let's say that mochin, that consciousness is a constricted consciousness, right? Because again, if we were really an expansive consciousness, we wouldn't feel those emotions. But now that we're feeling them, you bring them to Hashem with confidence. Then the storm subsides, and then we sort of lean back into the greater picture, to hope and to positivity and to realizing that it's okay, to realizing that it's not on me or on any of us to save the world, but it's on me to do the little bit that I can, and to start thinking more rationally, practical steps, etc., etc. All of this. But these two stages are crucial. Ukamayt Kain, he says the same thing Hisbodedus kazais when it comes to this kind of Hisbodedus. Shehi prikas tsar umerirus hanefesh shaloi keseder, which is just this bewildering sort of overturning of the standard order of how we sort of ease into things first, thinking the right thoughts, setting the stage, slowly but surely, easing into this, opening up with our words, and the soul expressing itself before her source, which we're going to get to in the Sefer. But a person just speaks b'li seder, with bitterness and pain, as avadai, so certainly, shetekef umiyad hazman lekoili el Hashem ezak. Immediately, it's the aspect of what it says in Tehillim, koili el Hashem ezak. I will holler with my voice, I'll shout out to Hashem. And you have this in Ramat Eshkol, which is part of Yerushalayim, where a lot of Americans or Anglos live. So they have a forest that's between Ramat Eshkol and the next mountain over, which is Ramat Shlomo. And there's like a sort of valley over there, if you've ever seen. And the whole night you just hear screaming in the forest. The whole night. Abba! Abba! The whole night. Howling, screaming. And they call it Yar Breslov. They call it the Breslover forest. Because people just go and they really let loose. They let loose. So either that comes at the end of their Hisbodedus, where they sort of worked it up, but I imagine a lot of times a person, particularly after a long day with the kids, sometimes you hear a woman screaming. No, I'm kidding. After a long day, a person comes to the forest, and that's the most real moment of the day. Because again, all of the other aspects of humanity are important, but they're secondary to this primary thing, which is that all of them are vessels and vehicles for coming more and more conscious and becoming more conscious of Hashem. But in this moment, where it's literally, like we described in earlier Shurim, the Ne'ilah, of history, and it's these last few moments, it's just the most intense form of Dveikus. It's the most direct. It's your words, your life, one-on-one, not in a minyan, not in a shul, out in nature, surrounded by the divine, and just speaking directly to him. That's it. There's nothing more direct. And that's what Hisbodedus is. So in that moment, a person's calling out. Kilu oymer Hashem yisbarach liyehudi. It's like the Jew hears Hashem saying to the person, Koev lecha. I feel it, like you're in pain. Sa'ak mara, so scream bitterly. This is what Hashem is saying. Cry out to me, just like the Jews in Egypt. It doesn't say that they davened very nicely. Vanizak. They screamed. They from the depth of their soul. It doesn't even say that they used any words that was beyond words. They just cried, but a real cry. What they call a geshrai, which in Yiddish, which in a certain sense, if you think about it, is really is in a certain way the least egoic moment of your life. This is why adults have such a hard time crying. Because crying is so vulnerable, right? Crying means to say, when does a person overflow? When they don't have the strength anymore, not on any conscious or cognitive or emotional level to sort of hold things in, Because all the while that we still think we're in control, so there's no place to cry, because what are you crying over? We'll figure it out. When a person cries, it means they've overflowed. And there's something so painful and something so precious and something so potentially spiritual in that moment. Because the ego, with all of its different forms, is precisely what stands in the way between the soul and the divine. It's what we call the klipa. It's the shell of the soul. Meaning to say, it's that part of us that deludes us into thinking that we're independent. That deludes us into thinking that we got this. We don't got this. Nobody got it, right? We're literally sparks of the infinite, who are sent on a mission in tandem with Him, pumping energy into our soul that gives life to our body each second of every day until we should all live long and happy till 120. Piacezner Hashem, and that's it. And then we go home. And I don't control that. The Gemara tells us, you live against your will. I don't choose to live. It's just a thing that happens. But Hashem is keeping me alive. Hashem is pumping me with life. Right? So, Hashem is pumping us with life consciously. And a little bit lost my train of thought. Hashem is pumping us with life consciously. And we start to think that we're independent beings and we are doing things, what's called in the pasuk, it's my hand, I built this, I created this, I'm doing this, And in a moment where it becomes really apparent that whatever it is that we seem to be doing isn't nearly enough, because everything's falling apart, and usually the more we try to control things, the worse things go. Right? Even though, like we mentioned before, it's got to be a balance. We do our shtadlus, but not thinking that like we're the ones who are going to do it. It's a partnership, right? Crying means that a person gets to such a place where they recognize I can't do it alone. I can't do it alone. And that is a beautiful moment. That is a beautiful moment. That's a childlike moment. That means that in that moment, we're accessing the spirituality and the sweetness and the innocence and the holiness of children in that moment. Become like a child. So this is what Hashem says. Ko'ev lecha. It hurts. So tza'ak mara. Call out to me. I'm here, I'm with you. I'm with you. And then afterwards, things go and they develop back in the normal way. But everything again, like we said before, that's when we are in pain. Keep in mind that the way Rabbi Nachman set up this concept of Hisbodedus was rather in a very consistent way. So this is not for every day. There are times like this. Hashem should protect us that it shouldn't be so often. We shouldn't feel this, but there are times like this when a person feels that way. Okay. And then it's a separate thing, and you don't have to be thinking about all the stages, and you just run and you let loose, and that's good. But now, with regard to every day, so it's a different story. And that's what we've been speaking about in the previous segments. We hope, the person that's doing Hisbodedus, the Jew, is not found every single day in such a state of pressure until they feel the point where they can't handle it anymore. Maybe there are stages like that, but it's not every single day of one's life. So then when a person comes to Hashem in a more standard, regular arrangement, a person comes, like we said before, level after level, milamata lamala, slowly but surely setting the stage, b'yishuv, there's time to focus on all the different concepts until we've gotten ourselves into the emotional state where we're ready to communicate with an open channel, with a healthy sense of self, knowing that we're essentially worthy, like we spoke about in previous classes, and then from that place, then we can start to talk about our life with the master storyteller who knows the whole story already from beginning to end, whose story we are living out. It's like incredible, it's like a character in the story having a conversation with the author. That's the middle of typing his story. It's wild. It's the greatest yichud, it's the greatest intimacy in that moment. The first thing is the person finds themselves what's called bachutz, outside. He doesn't mean like outside in nature. That's also true, if it is true. Let's say a person is doing Hisbodedus in the field. That's not what he means. He says a person first finds themselves b'li dibur uvelev sagar. It's like you come to Hisbodedus, sometimes you feel completely closed, especially if a person merits to make a set time every day. You're not always in the mood, and you're not always in the space. So that's okay. A person's not like, it's not the kind of thing where if I'm in the zone, then I go. It's a thing of consistency. Like I have to connect to my, outlet and a power source every single day in a very visceral, real way. Even if a person's davening, shachris, mincha, marav, and shul, or whatever it is we're doing, all of it is good. But I need like a boost, a shot to the heart. Like the most intense experience. I'm not always going to be feeling it, and I have to understand that totally part of the process, and there is a process to slowly but surely help me climb that ladder. So here's how he describes it. The first thing is, the person is outside of this palace of God consciousness. Believe dibor, they can't even think of any words to say. Believe sagar, their heart is closed, they're not in it. And then, using the technique that we've begun to describe, but we're going to get into much more in depth, then you feel, okay, I'm on the threshold. Slowly getting there. Slowly but surely, level after level, right? A person makes their way into the, I don't know what you call that first part of the house. Let's say if a person has a house, hall. Yeah, is it the hall? The antechamber, maybe? But that's like a very fancy, archaic way of saying it. Huh? Porch? No, when a person goes in. Yeah, like what is that? That's a foyer. Thank you. That's actually the word. Yes, foyer. That's right. That's right. So a person comes into the foyer, at least in America, I think it is, and that's good. And then a person's in, and then a person walks down the hall, and then a person, makes it to the, to the kitchen counter where there's just like a jar of the yummiest fresh baked chocolate chip cookies, and their best friend just sitting with a hot mug of coffee. And then it's like, and then, okay, we're in. So it goes step after step after step. The Reishis Inyan and the beginning needs to be, like we said before, before a person speaks, we need to be in the right mind frame for what we're about to do. It's not so simple. It's an inner process. Some people call it meditation. I'm not sure. I mean, it requires some level, at least, of contemplation. Whether that's synonymous with meditation means a lot of things. But Hisbodedus, it means to stop first and to slowly but surely start to get into this zone. Now, in order to get into it, we have to be aware of everything that we've spoken about until now in all the previous 7 classes and what we're going to speak about in the future. But it begins with self-worth. Right? It begins with understanding what I hear Hashem whispering to me in this moment is Tov Shabbat. Thank you for coming. Right? It means the world to me that you're here. And then we start to warm up. I really do matter to Hashem. I really do matter because I'm created in His divine image, whatever level that means, and I have human life in me. And what a privilege that I'm able to do so many things, and I'm able to encourage people and do my part to bring light to the world. And I'm not all bad, etc. It says before even one word came out of our mouth, we have to get into the right mind frame. So Kanal Shemezami Liboy La Hashem HaKorei, he calls it preparing the heart to Hashem HaKorei Elav, who we should perceive to be calling out to us first. So first, it's interesting, you come to Hisbodedus, the first thing we do is not speak. That's usually what we think Hisbodedus means, you're going to talk to God. The first thing in Hisbodedus is not to speak, but rather to listen. To listen. The first step in Hisbodedus is to listen. Listen to what? You're overhearing someone's conversation on a park bench? No, that's not what we're listening to, right? What are we listening to? It means inside our inner ears. Our hearing, Hashem giving us strength. It's the first thing. How many people go through their whole life, they never hear that from Hashem? Because they've never been taught by anyone that's teaching us anything about the Creator in the name of Torah authority, that's what God is saying literally all the time. They've never heard it. People have, chas v'shalom, a warped conception of God, which is not this. And it comes with pain and heaviness and pressure and belittling and shame and all this stuff. And it's just not what it is. It's not what it is. Again, the balance, not shame and not any of that stuff, that's in no way is good, right? Certainly not unhealthy, negative shame. But the balance of knowing that, at the same time, God is giving me all the strength and love in the world, and because of that, God respects me enough to require me to step up, right, and to do things. And God is sort of, quote unquote, disappointed, but not any more or less than a parent would be if their kid is not fulfilling their potential, especially if the whole entire world depends on it, literally. So that's like that, but it's a different conception. We don't begin in the place of conditional relationship where God is all the way up there and you're all the way down here and God is standing there with a whip, and there's a bunch of stuff, and if you don't do that, straight to hell. Like that's not. God created the world out of his kindness. There's a whole story that's unfolding, or from beginning of time to the end of time, there's a glorious narrative that's flowing through revolutions and counter-revolutions and evolutions of every kind, and people rising to higher and higher and higher levels of consciousness, even if it hasn't yet manifested in the most extreme form in a practical sense. But something's happening, and something's happened to the human spirit throughout history, all of which involves them coming really to turn around and to face their creator, but not just their creator, the concept of God in an antiquated, like archaic religious sense. Mamish, in the most broad, expansive, believable conception of this thing called the infinite one, the Ein Sof. And that's where history is heading. And Hashem sort of believes in us so much that he gave us the whole world into our hands. And he says, all you need to do is believe in you, as even just a fraction of the amount that I believe in you, and we can change the world together. We can absolutely change the world together. But Hashem says you have to take yourself seriously. That's what it is. And it's just out of love and belief in us and faith in us. And that's a completely different dynamic. So Hashem is calling to us. That's how Hisbodedus starts. When Hashem is telling us about how valuable we are to him. We use this lashon before, this terminology. We build up. Hashem builds up our confidence, builds up ourselves. Until we feel this rising of what he called like this vapor of the heart. Something begins to. It's warm. We start to feel okay. Something's happening. Something's happening inside of me. I matter, because that's what we're all looking for. Is to matter. And then we go level after level until we come to that Yichud HaShalim, to that place of absolute oneness. Kifi Erka, as we're going to describe, as is relevant to that person in that particular time. And he ends this first chapter of the Sefer, when a person merits to really succeed in forging this bond, but in the right way, in all of the ways that it needs to be accessed in a healthy way, in a proper way, just like there are any number of ways in which a male and a female could ostensibly have a connection, but there are right ways and there are other ways, right? And so in this context, it means mamish in the right way, like with chuppah and kiddushin, you understand? Like in really the way that is completely and entirely appropriate, as it were, so that it can produce the results that are necessary to come out of a real relationship, not a fling, and not something that's demeaning to one or the other. None of this. A real relationship, right? If we can do that with Hashem and go through the stages necessary to get to that point, where at the end of a Hisbodedus session, if anybody drives an electric car, I don't know, this could not be a relevant mashal for most, but if you plug in the car, at least to some of the the on the road stations, charging stations here, so it goes through a series of checks, and I don't know, I'm forgetting what the checks are, but there's like a series of 7 things, and green light goes, and then you wait another 10 seconds, another green light, and another green light, another green light, and like until finally it's a secure connection, and it's like, and most of these don't work. Most of them don't work. The infrastructure is horrible, and the mileage is so terrible on these electric cars, because presumably, like, you're not running to get gas all the time, but you can plug in. But the thing is that you're driving from charging station to charging station with a little bit of battery that you have left, hoping that the next one will work, and then you get to it and it doesn't work. And by the time you finally find one that works, usually you're completely out of energy. So, and it's happened to me before, and I've needed to be towed. Like a minute before Shabbos, and I walked back from the North Circular. It was a crazy story. That was when our son was still in the hospital, and that was a thing that happened. So it's a very special feeling when you plug it in and you just see the checks coming on, and you're like, okay, I think we got this, and check, and then another check, and then another check, and then it says, connection has been established. And like that's what's coming to mind now when I think about this. A person comes to Hisbodedus. There are a series of checks. We have to come to Hashem with a holistically healthy and well-rounded and founded. Well-rounded and founded, meaning like established perception of who He is, who we are, and why. Right? Who He is. What does this mean? God, like what creator, what it means to be human, and why, right? Meaning what is all of this? Like what is this for? Where did it come from? Where is it going? And when a person is able to take the time to study from those tzaddikim who devoted their lives to giving us a holistic and a healthy and a complete framework for connecting to Hashem in the way that Hashem always hoped that Jews would connect to Him, which is happening now at the end of time. In a way of Yaakov Avinu, like we said before, synthesis, knowing every aspect of the dynamic, all of which are absolutely crucially necessary. Then it's like all these checks coming on until finally connection has been established. Then a person lives with a healthy emunah that accompanies them in every moment of life. The difficult moments, sure, a person knows Hashem is with us. In the good moments, not just like smooth sailing, there's work to do. And there's always a way of connecting, and there's always a way of feeling that no matter where we are connected already. So a person, the person rises up stage after stage, el hayichud hashalim, to that secure, complete connection. So he says, here it is. When we can make a secure connection, el mechaynai, let's say mechonit, I think means a car, el mechaynai, to Hashem, our energy, our power source. So then it'll eventually get to the same place where you can pour forth everything you're feeling, in a way that you don't even have to think about it. The words are tumbling over themselves to come out because you're activated, and you feel it. Like if not now, when? This is it. This is the time to really, and it won't be as difficult. I'm begging Hashem, I don't want to waste my life. If there's one thing that I want least of all is to waste my life. I don't want to waste it. I don't want to waste it. Hashem, I don't want to waste it. Help me find the right vessels to shine my light. Help me figure this thing out so that I can overcome my challenges, so that I can be for you what you intended for me to be, for you, for me, for you, for me, for both of us, for the relationship, for the universe, for the cosmos, for the infinite, for all that is, right? And in that moment, in that process, we receive within our hearts and souls strength, and strong will, la'ava, to walk further into this bond of love, liyira, and awe, as Hashem, the Creator, laleches b'chol drachav, and to really imitate His ways, la'asas ritzoyno la'avda b'levav shalim, and to really fulfill His will as best as we can, and to serve Him with totality, with a whole heart. Okay, so that's the end of chapter 1. We've been working on this for a while, and Baruch Hashem, I'm really, really thrilled that we were able to finish the parak. For the last few minutes, let's take a look at the next segment, which is from Tzav V'Ziruz. That's really the Piacezner Rebbe, who was also known as the Eish Kodesh. He was like the Rebbe of the Warsaw Ghetto. He had a huge Hasidus, thousands of Hasidim before the Holocaust. Very, very tragic, horribly tragic. He lost his son, he lost his wife, and was witnessing the horrors all around. And from that place, he was a beacon of light, perhaps the greatest darkness in Jewish history. And people looked toward him to give them strength to somehow hold on to faith in the face of the greatest concealment of divinity, that we could possibly begin to imagining, right, beyond us. And so he kept a diary where he writes small little spiritual teachings. Some of them are personal about himself, and some of them are just general. And so he writes this very, very beautifully. And he says like this, and with this we'll come to an end for tonight. Betach shamata, he says, you've certainly heard, or you've seen in books, ra'ayot, rayas, proofs, al metzias elokis, to this that God exists. Right? There's so many different rational proofs that a person can read. Books, permission to believe, right? Permission to receive, all these different proofs. And he says these come for people whose faith is weak and need support to believe in that which their mind is challenging them against, really accepting wholeheartedly. And the main proofs are from this world, right? This aspect of being able to see, chachmasai, being able to work it out philosophically, that okay, everything must have come from somewhere, but that somewhere had a somewhere, and that somewhere had a somewhere, until it must have started from a place that's completely beyond this category of somewhere, which we call, the first cause, the Aristotelian sort of idea that the Rambam borrows in a certain sense, that idea of sibas, kola sibas, etc., using rationalistic frameworks v'yecholta in the person's capacity. But he says, I'm writing to you in a very candid way to the person that's reading this, which is all of us today. He says, really, is it so necessary for you to have proofs of God's existence from the world? He says, hoi vavoy. He says, whoa, like that's really sad. That's really sad. Because ha'im loy tishma v'loy tira, have you not heard or have you not seen? Eich nafshecha betucha, how certain your soul is. B'ri'iyasas Hashem, when it sees God, u'medaberes elav b'lashon noichach, and feels comfortable speaking directly to the divine. Ata Hashem, making brachas, blessed are you, being conscious, subconsciously, primordially consciously, primally conscious of the fact that there's some mystery here, there's some presence, which is beingness. It is something. Like what is this? When I say this, I don't mean this building, this or this, a particular city within this country, on this continent. No. I mean the fact that there are facts. The laws of physics, mathematics, like what is this? I'm talking about being in its totality. The allness of just the human experience. Like what is it? See, he says, certainly you've been able to access your soul, which can't be fooled into thinking that Hashem doesn't exist because she's a part of him. That's trying to convince my hand that my body, my torso, my chest doesn't exist. I mean, it's a part of the divine. Consciousness is separate from all of being. There is no natural occurrence of consciousness within any other aspect of creation except for the human, who has the awareness that he is aware, right? That's really, in a certain sense, the definition of consciousness, as best as we can define it, because it's so incomprehensible. Heim b'tfilasa, whether it's in its prayers, heim b'tshukasa, or whether it's in its yearning, where the soul yearns for something bigger, and not just something bigger. The soul yearns for the big-ist, right? The soul yearns for nothing short of the infinite, and nothing short of the infinite ever gives us what we're looking for. And that means that this world will never give us what we're looking for, ever. There will be brief moments that are portals to the infinite. Outside of that, though, this world is a place of limitation. Until everything fundamentally changes, which I do believe we're on the threshold of. Against the framework of all of history. So what is it that we're yearning for? You have to convince yourself that there is something within whom everything was brought into being and is continually brought into being every split second of every day. Your soul knows that already. Doesn't need proofs. The fact of experience, when we shift our conception of God, isn't some man in the sky, because that's like really hard to believe it. But once we mature a bit, and we allow ourselves to access a more believable version of this thing, which nivra in Jewish history, it's something we lost throughout exile. That we have this childish notion of this crazy maniacal, being. We're so deluded in our conception of what Hashem is. It's scary. It's wild. But Hashem sent tzaddikim that are re-educating us. That ein oid malvada doesn't just mean that there's no God other than Him. It means there is nothing outside of Him. He is the place of being. That's much, much bigger understanding of what it is. What it is. It's coming to be awake to what already is present in everything. And our soul knows that because it's conscious of everything. So it's already aware. But it just means if we are having a hard time sort of believing it, which is totally normal, but what it means is that there's a lack of communication between our soul and our egoic mind. And we're either having a hard time experiencing what our soul naturally feels, or we're forgetting so quickly those moments where we are certain. And every human, I believe every human has moments like that. Some more frequently, some less frequently. There are moments in your life where it is 1,000,000,000% certain. Whether it's synchronicity, we call this hashgacha pratis, when a person just sees things fall into place in such a way where it's just impossible that it's random. Or a person is able to overcome the obvious hurdles of the extreme improbability of a world of such complexity emerging, without an overwhelming sort of intelligence of one form or another, and we're able to recognize, hello, I'm a person. What does it mean? And we say all this all the time. Why do I have two eyes? Is it any less surprising than having three? or meaning, essentially, wake up to the miracles of things. You're overwhelmed with the wonder of the seven wonders of the world, whatever those are, or you hear a great piece of music, whatever it is, or you learn a mind-blowing piece of Torah, which is really the primary way. And the more that we encounter the depth of Torah, the pnimius of Torah, the mysticism of Torah, in a healthy, proper way, the more it's not question. It's not a maybe there is a God who wrote this thing. You cannot be convinced otherwise when a person accesses Torah on that level, right? So, but we forget those moments. The soul sees God, or whatever that means, on its level. Like we spoke about hearing Hashem, we see Hashem clearly, right opposite it. And that's why I thought it was connected to what we were learning. When it cries out, it cries out from her pain. And it says, Lo ira ra. I know that no matter what happens to me, Lo ira ra, I shall not fear evil, ki ata imadi. And we say this with confidence. You're with me. I'm not alone in this world. You're pumping me with life every split second. It's like we're taking sanctuary, we're holding on, taking refuge at the throne of glory, and automatically we're healed, we're reconnected, recalibrated. And when it yearns, and when it experiences being poured out before Hashem, Marison, it says, Ana Hashem, please, Master of heaven and earth, Karveinu Elecha, bring me close to you. I don't want this life of lowliness. I don't want it. It's not even so difficult to let go of, because it's not as if I'm letting go of something so wonderful, and sacrificing so much. A person comes to realize this world is Hevel, Havalim Hakol Hevel. It really is. It really genuinely is. And it does not satisfy. And this can't be all there is. Not that it can't be that there's not more to this world. I'm saying something more than that. It can't be that there's not more to me. You understand? I'm not saying that, a person surveys all there is to enjoy in this world and is like, okay. There's a moment of awakening where a person comes to the certain realization that I'm bigger than this. I'm just bigger than this. This is not what I was created for. To eat roll after roll of sushi, and to go to party after party, and to hang out here and there and bounce around from this relationship to that relationship, and to be a person that's consumed by this worldliness in such a way that leaves me feeling more anxious, having a worse sense of self, and feeling generally miserable and confused. There's more to life than this. I'm here to do something. I'm not here to hang out and have expectations of everything working out, which, like, why should anyone have an expectation like that? Life is challenging. It is. And that's normal, because we're the ones with the tools to fix it. So a plumber who comes to a house and finds all the pipes broken is not complaining. He goes, he gets his toolbox, and he gets to work. There's work to do. We sell ourselves short, and Hashem doesn't. So when a Jew feels this way, we begin to yearn, Amaris, please Hashem, help me realize what I really am. And I say realize, not just become aware of it. Realize it, manifest it. I want to nullify that sense of self to you. Because I'm yearning for you. I'm yearning for what's beyond what my eyes can see, my nose can smell, my ears can hear, my fingers can touch, etc. We finish. Says the Piacezner, what are you busy with all these books, with proofs outside of yourself? You are the biggest proof. The voices inside, the certainty that your soul already feels, is the greatest proof. Because your soul, your essence, is so certain. Because it has experienced Hashem. It knows in so many different forms that we described. And Shlomo Melech says in Mishlei, Chachmas b'chutz taroina, wisdom sings in the chutz, in the outside. Mi pesi yasser heina, who is the fool that seeks to enter here? Chasar leiv, lacking a heart. Amar loy, what Shlomo Melech is really saying, that misha tzarech lechachmas chutz, a person whose whole Judaism is based on philosophical speculation in some book that we read on theology. And this is like, okay, now, yeah, I believe. Lahavi Rais michutz la'atzmi, bringing proofs from that which is outside of our immediate experience as humans. Mina olam pesi v'chasar levu. It means we're missing something. I mean, we're disconnected to what the deepest essence of ourselves are already experiencing all the time. That can be best experienced when life gets to be a bit too much and we cry and we overflow. Because then you access your real self. And in that moment, all the big fancy theories, they fall away, because we're reduced to just to a small child that wants her tati, that wants her abba, her daddy. That's the greatest. It's not a proof. It's an experience. It's more than a proof. It's not a proof. It's the thing itself. Because if a Jew has a heart, we all have hearts, but if a Jew's heart is what we called it in the previous year, a Breslover heart, right? A leiv basar, which is the letters of Breslov, right? A heart of flesh, not a heart of stone. It's an innate perception. And we don't need anything outside of that itself. And so Hisbodedus, the experience of coming to the field, talking to Hashem, like that joke that we said, where the person comes to this one and that one says, how do you know there's a God? Because he thinks about Hashem all the time, or because he learned lots of Torah, or because he has all the proofs. And the Breslover says, I know there's a God because I just spoke to him. It's a different thing. A person speaks to Hashem directly, yashar yashirut. In that aspect, there's a certainty, because it's your life. It's how you live. It becomes your reality. And not, I want to be clear, it doesn't become your reality in a way where it's not objective reality, and like, okay, we each subjectively create our own worlds, even though there's some kind of illusion in the Me'ashilach, obviously not to the extreme of that, but he does speak about this very clearly with regard to dreams and interpretations. It's more than that. We become awake to that reality that's already there waiting to be discovered. But we don't discover it from the outside. We go in. We jump into the experience of living with Hashem. Hashem will become darn real to you. And we'll see the way in which everything starts to shift. Everything starts to shift. And the lived experience of the quote-unquote benefit, right, that's promised to us by a person that's walking with the Eitz Chaim here, with a tree of life, or Va'atam adveikem Hashem lekechem, those who are bound up with the divine Chaim kulchem hayam, to really be alive. It's tzaddikim afilu b'misasam kriyim Chaim, the righteous, even after they die, they're still alive. Like, to really live, you start to feel it. we're calmer, we're happier, we are just better in every way, and we're able to contribute in a more glowing way. We're higher level people. We don't get sunk down into the drama and the smallness. We're expanded souls who are able to move the world further along, which is precisely what each and every one of us was created to do. So we don't sell ourselves short. We see ourselves in the way that Hashem sees us. And sometimes there's a Hisbodedus of just crying out of the pain, which we said there's space for, and we talked about that. Generally speaking, we build ourselves up level after level after level, and we revel in the levels of our soul, basking in the most visceral awareness of the being with whom she communicates. It should be privileged not just to learn about it, but to experience it for real. Because it's not just a matter of learning it, because you could learn it all your life. But like David HaMelech says, Ta'amu uru'u. Torah needs to be tasted, and then it's seen. Tasted and then seen. And so when a person actually puts this into practice, and they shut off their phone, and they separate themselves from everyone else, and you go on your own. Sometimes it's the first time in your life you really encounter yourself. It could be for some people. So we're so busy all the time, we don't even realize it. If we're not around other people physically, we're constantly, information, we're distracted. A person goes into nature, it's a different kind of experience. Should be zocheh to let Hashem into our lives in a real way. But Ezra Hashem is Baruch Sahir went so far over time.